Redraft season is here, but that doesn't mean that best ball season is over. The lobbies, they are red hot, and this week DraftKings is celebrating best ball week. Different offers every single day. I'm Tom Strachan, joined by Andrew Erickson, as we continue to draft our way through this hot best ball summer. Try and help you gain an edge in these massive best ball contests. Andrew, we've been pouring over ADP rises and fallers each week. We've been talking what's going into players going up and down and whether we're buying it or selling it. But now we get back into a draft. Are you ready to strike it big?
Oh, I am. I'm ready to draft this team on DraftKings. And you said, hot best ball summer. Yes, it is very hot. If you live anywhere, I think in the United States, I don't know how it is for you across the pond, Tom, but it has been brutal here in the Northeast, in New England. Every single day, I walk outside, check the weather. It's 95 degrees and humid. And I'm just sick of sweating over everything. I'm sweating over my desk. I'm sweating on the counter. And I have air conditioning in some parts of my house, but not all of them, because who's got the money for that? And not me, at least until we win this DraftKings best ball tournament. But besides that, yeah, I'm having fun, because a lot of times I'll go for a walk. I'll be drafting a best ball team on one of the multiple apps, and I'll be sweating during the entire thing. Whether it's because of the draft, because of the heat, I don't know, but I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, not much need for air conditioning over here in England, but we definitely have less of a tolerance to heat in general, just sitting here in our brick houses. So it's definitely warm enough sitting here in my garage. But yeah, I mean, if you're not waking up to 20 notifications that you're on the clock.
That's exactly my morning this morning. I went to bed. I was like, I had 2. I was like, all right, but I got time. Got 9 hours left, so I should be able to pick them up when I wake up. And there was like 30 when I woke up, so that was great.
Well, that's it. It's all about finding a process. The DraftKings contest we're going to be diving into tonight is the Best Ball Millionaire contest, which is $20 entry, $15 million total prize fund, 150 max entries each, 882,000 entries in total are possible for this contest. In terms of the prize money, there is so much up top for this. Like, if you finish inside the top 100, you'll be set for a minimum of $10,000. Top 25, 50,000. Top 15, 100,000. And of course, where we're aiming for is that first position overall, where you can make 1.5 million. Just making the finals alone is a tall task, though. Weeks 1 to 14, you take part in a 12-team league. The top 2 of that go through after that, then play in another 12-team league. The top team in that week, in week 15, then goes on to do the same in week 16. And then in week 17, it's an all-out battle with 1,021 different teams taking part in the final. You make $1,000 just for making it to the final. But of course, if you want to get up to the big prizes amongst those 1,000 people, there's a lot of different nuances. Like, Andrew, what do you think is the most important thing that people need to know when they're going to try and win it all in this contest?
I think that you need to really shoot for upside here. I know that seems like we're beating into a drum when it comes to a lot of these tournaments, but you're not playing for 6th place, 5th place. You have to play for that, 99th percentile outcome, essentially, is what you're looking for. So all of the best ball type of staples and foundations that we talk about on several different shows. And you've written a lot of great stuff that's over on the website on FantasyPros.com. Just the foundations of what makes a best ball winning team, what makes a best ball winning roster. You have correlation. You have looking at week 17, because you're looking at, okay, how do I get all the money at the top? Well, you have to make sure that in week 17, your team can then separate from the pack at another level. Not only getting there through weeks 1 through 14, but also finding a way to separate yourself in the playoff week. So, and that even considers, okay, you have week 17 correlation. What about week 16? What about week 15? Like, layering every single step in the process. It seems like you're being very detailed with the approach, but that's what it takes to really separate yourself from the pack. And I think that going with some more riskier strategies, whether you're going low at one position and kind of leaving your draft feeling almost uncomfortable. If you feel like you've drafted depth and you're balanced across the board, well, that's a team that looks like it's probably going to not finish in first place. It may not finish in last, but again, what the goal is here is you really want to build a team that can win it all at the end of the day.
Yeah, 2 years ago on DraftKings, the winning team was a team with 4 quarterbacks, and it had Jordan Love and Jacoby Brissett on there, who contributed just about nothing. They had Russell Wilson stacked with Jerry Jeudy. as the only QB plus pass catcher stack that they had. They ran pure. That's probably not the way that we want to attack things. Last year's winner was a much more traditional team. They had 3 different quarterbacks all stacked up. We're going to cover all those kind of points as we go, because so much of best ball, when it gets out of that week 17 final, is very similar to DFS. You've got to take on a large field and you've got to use little nuances to try and beat people, because the reality is a lot of those players in the final are going to be highly owned by the other teams there. Last year in the DraftKings final, which was 1,364 people, 54% of teams had Amari Cooper on them. Amari Cooper blew up in week 16 before then missing week 17 with an injury. So you've got to look for ways that you can make your roster different. You've got to be willing to take chances on some players whilst also building sound. And we're going to get into all of that. But Andrew, we can keep talking as we do this, but I think it's time for us to just get into this draft and get on with it. How many of these would you like to finish the offseason by having drafted?
I don't really have a goal in mind. It's kind of just, hey, I'm going to join another league here, or they're giving out an offer, so I'm going to join another league here. I do need to pull back on some of the best ball drafts when we get closer and closer to redraft season, because I have to make sure that I am mentally right in the right frame of mind to give advice about redraft, because I think what's happening is you're seeing a lot of best ball analysis kind of bleed over into redraft, and I think that's just natural, the way that things kind of work. You're going to see that happen. But they really are, again, we just kind of talked about at the top, they're very different games. Even though they both contain the word fantasy football and we're drafting the same players and there's a draft and you actually you don't set your lineups. Like, that's the number one thing that's different in best ball is you don't set your lineup, it sets it for you. So even from that standpoint, we're so much more about weekly ceilings versus, especially with the money at the top of the board towards those playoff weeks. It's really less about, okay, what is this guy going to do cumulatively for me over the year, but it's what can this guy deliver for me on a week-to-week basis, and kind of balancing that approach out. So that's the way I'm kind of looking at things. And of course, I'm looking at the board. Did we get the 12?
We got the 12.
The content gods once again deliver for Tom. This is what the people need.
It is, and we are going to get plenty of time to be able to talk all things as we wait on our turn. The DraftKings drafts, they are 20 rounds. Your starting lineup is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and then 1 flex position, which can be running back, wide receiver, or tight end. So there's definitely an emphasis on the wide receiver position, because you can start up to 4 a week, whereas with running back position, you're never starting more than 3. One of the key differences, though, on DraftKings compared to other platforms, it's not only full PPR, but you get 3-point bonuses for any player who accumulates 300 passing yards, or 100 rushing yards, or 100 receiving yards. Last year, there were 72 different running backs who hit the 100-yard threshold in an individual game. There were 162 wide receivers who had a 100-yard receiving game. So it's obvious that wide receivers have a slightly easier path to it, in part because there's just more of them on the field. We're seeing wide receivers being pushed up draft boards this year, Andrew. Are you favoring a wide receiver heavy approach through the first 5 rounds?
I think in DraftKings specifically, the full PPR nature of it, the fact that you can start up to 4 wide receivers, it's not a matter of are you approaching this with an aggressive mindset for receivers, but to me, it seems more like this is the entry fee to sign up to try to get a chance to win. It's not saying it's right, not saying that this was the way we need to be doing things, but it's what the market has dictated. Hey, this is the cost of entry. Like, you need to have an X amount of receivers to just stand a chance of being there at the end. And it kind of reminds you a little bit about in Superflex leagues, right? Where the market in the specific draft dictates what the quarterback market is going to be like in that specific room, where you can say, oh, well, I don't want to take these overpriced quarterbacks. But then if you don't, then you just don't have a chance to win at all. And I kind of feel the same way about how wide receivers are being treated in some of these earlier best ball drafts, where, look, you can try to push against it and I don't want to overpay for these receivers. I don't think they deserve to go here. But at the end of the day, you still have to start 3 receivers. You have to start them more than any other position. And if you have a lack of them overall, especially at the top end, well, you're just going to be fighting an uphill battle the entire time. So I think it's okay to embrace it, but you don't necessarily need to do it over aggressive where I have to have 5 receivers in the first 5 rounds. I think you can be able to be more fluid than that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's loads of different nuances to how you can build a team on DraftKings. Having 20 rounds here compared to 18 on Underdog, it opens up a lot more possibilities. So we can definitely talk about that as we go. So far through 7 picks in the first round, we've seen Christian McCaffrey go at 101. He is the 101 in ADP, just ahead of CD Lamb, who goes second. Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Bijan Robinson, and Brees Hall. I've been in a few of these drafts today, and there's been some pretty wild stuff, but so far this is playing out normally. We are a couple of picks away. At the top of ADP is Garrett Wilson, Jameer Gibbs, Marvin Harrison, Saquon Barkley, and Drake London. Andrew, where are we going with these first 2 picks?
I like Garrett Wilson a lot. I think that he's set up to see so many targets in the Jets offense. So I like him in the full PPR format. Gibbs, I also like a lot. Again, another player that's a pass catcher out of the backfield. So I'm cool if we want to go chalky with Garrett Wilson and Gibbs, unless you want somebody else. I definitely like Wilson, though.
Yeah, I definitely like Garrett Wilson. He's a player that I've been trying to get more of in recent weeks. I think that's I'm not overly high on Aaron Rodgers because we know that he can play slow. The last time we saw him, he didn't do great. On our ADP risers that we got into on Monday, we talked about how you brought up the stat that it's been what, like 2 years since he last had a 300
3 years since
passer.
2021.
So yeah, so I'm good with Garrett Wilson and Jameer Gibbs. I think that's a friendly start. It lets us open up a bunch of different possibilities for how we can go after this point, and that's easily one of my most favorite parts of best ball. There are so many different roster constructions and strategies that we can start. If you've been the kind of person who's been reading about best ball content since we started putting best ball content up on fantasypros.com in March, then I know you're going to be excited about this sort of content, seeing more of these best ball drafts here on fantasypros.com. And if you are, you need to tell the people who are in charge. You need to tell them so we can do more of these shows. Go to fantasypros.com/review/ and tell them you want more best ball in your life, because me and Andrew, we live in these best ball lobbies. We want to be in them as often as possible, bringing you as much best ball strategy content as we can. Andrew, anything surprised you from the first 15 or so picks? Saquon Barkley went just after us, then Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, and Jonathan Taylor.
No, I think that so far this has been a pretty chalky draft. Nothing really too surprising. I do want to get your thoughts though, because I feel like, and I'm working on an article. I was talking to you about this before we hopped on to record, but I'm working on this wide receivers to avoid article, just kind of dissecting some of these round 2 receivers where I think that a lot of the reason they're being drafted where they're going is through the upside case, but for every upside case, there is also a downside case that we would rather ignore than actually acknowledge. And I was wondering for you in particular, in this second round, you have Collins, Ayuk, Adams, London, Olave. Is there someone that kind of sticks out to you the most that you kind of find yourself gravitating towards? And then even Marvin Harrison went in the first round in this particular draft. He actually went ahead of Garrett Wilson, which I disagree with. I'm glad that we were able to get Wilson and not have to settle for Harrison. But I was interested because I was reading, and this is actually from the Fantasy Football Reddit, and basically someone looked at round 2 and they said it's kind of like a minefield. Like you think that these could be potential hits, but I could also see scenarios where you're paying a lot for a player that is either unproven, 1-year production, all projection, and that has me somewhat concerned about pressing the button on some of these guys.
I like the second round. The third round I find more problematic, and I think that's definitely an area which causes me more headaches and more, that's when I end up running the clock down more. I'm like, oh, which one am I going with? And then it comes back to, I have this much exposure to this player, so maybe it's time to differentiate, or I have some week 17 correlation that I can prioritize with this player, so let's do that instead. But yeah, I like Nico Collins. I can definitely see the downside case with him, with adding Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell being healthy. Brandon Ayuk, probably my biggest stance has been all off season that Deebo Samuel is the better value. You look back at what Deebo Samuel did last year and how important he is schematically to the Niners. And I'm comfortable taking Deebo Samuel midway through the second. I want Brandon Ayuk at the back of the second to be able to take him. Devontae Adams, is probably the guy who I stay away from the most. But give me all the Drake London, give me all the Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith. I mean, yeah, I love all those guys. I think they're great. If Cooper Cup sneaks up into the second round as he has done in this draft, that's a little steep for me. Like
I'm
last,
I'm not doing it. I'm not. I've been down this road. Michael Thomas looked great last year too. He's back to his old self. And what happened? Like we have quotes from Derek Carr saying last year, "Oh, he looks like Michael Thomas to me."
yeah,
I just
no, I mean,
yeah.
I really like Cooper Cup, and heading into last year, I was very, very bullish on him. I don't normally take massive stands in the first round because there's so many talented players,
Mhm.
but last year I was like, you know what, I would hate to go into the season without an overexposed amount of Cooper Cup. Overexposed, for anybody who doesn't know, means more than 8% of one player, because if you've drafted each player one time from each round, you'd have 8% on average. And I ended up with like 20% Cooper Cup, and it wasn't much fun. We are 2 picks away. Sam Laporta, Travis Etienne, Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen. Sam Laporta does go. Isaiah Pacheco, Michael Pittman, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell. We could double tap wide receiver and take Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, who play each other in week 14, or anything else that stands out to you, Andrew, with 15 seconds to go?
I mean, I really like Michael Pittman. I know that you mentioned that you need more Michael Pittman in your life, so I think that's a good pick there. I'm such a strong believer in this Colts offense, and you look at the receptions leader over the last 2 years. Michael Pittman ranks fifth in total receptions over the past 2 seasons, over 100 catches. That's what he's averaging. And I get
Okay,
that there's
let's come back to that. Firstly, we need another player. So we've got Michael Pittman, 20 seconds left. We've got Etienne, Diggs, Allen, Pacheco, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, George Pickens. My lean would be for either Flowers or Diggs here.
I'll go with Diggs.
Let's go with Diggs. That's definitely a more uncommon build. But carry on as you were waxing lyrical about Michael Pittman.
I think that he's underrated from a standpoint of the Colts offense is going to be run heavy. But even if that's the case, the Colts offense is going to be good. That's what I care about more than necessarily how they're scoring their points and how they're getting yardage. If they're continuing to drive down the field and putting Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson in scoring opportunities, then I want that number one wide receiver on that offense. Pittman has been an alpha target earner at the NFL level. He goes in the fourth round, end of the third round, over 100 catches back to back season. This is full PPR. And he plays in an offense that we're really excited about. He plays in a division that we're really excited about. He plays in a dome. All of these factors to me scream, hey, maybe this guy hasn't hit his ceiling quite yet. Because when you look at his numbers, what's the thing that's lacking is just the touchdowns, right? Touchdowns just really haven't been there. Well, maybe that's just been because of the offenses he's been in have yet to take that next step. So the yardage has been there for him. And what's the best predictor of future scoring is yardage. So I think Pittman to me is underrated. So I keep drafting him in this round, and I get the argument against him in the run heaviness of the Colts, but I feel more confident and bullish being, well, if the Colts offense is good, I think things will shake out in my favor. And I'm just not convinced that Josh Downs, Adonai Mitchell are going to come in here and take away from Pittman. I'm not convinced that. I think those guys are complementary pieces and will just help the offense overall as a unit. But I mean, Pittman was top 10 in red zone targets last year and he didn't score a lot. And it's very similar to a bet like Garrett Wilson, right? Again, another guy who's been a producer, but just has not had that touchdown season yet. So I like the pairing of Pittman for those reasons.
Yeah, I think for me, Pittman kind of comes into things. The question marks start from in this draft, DJ Moore at the 309, and then you get to Pittman. And much as I agree with all your points, I also just worry that in the red zone, this is going to be a run heavy offense. I think that Josh Downs was starting to look quite good before he got injured against the Patriots in the Germany game. And I think AD Mitchell is probably one of the most boom bust rookies that we've got in the NFL this year. But it's just a slightly higher quality of surrounding talent than has been there. And it kind of hinges on Jonathan Taylor. If Jonathan Taylor is reasonably good, then I think it's going to be harder for Michael Pittman to hit his ceiling. But like I think we fall into certain biases when you draft a lot after a while, and sometimes it takes having these conversations to kind of shake you free from them. So Pittman is a guy that I really liked at his cost last year, and maybe he's a player that I just start taking when he falls past ADP a little bit more at this point, because scooping up players as they fall past ADP has been a winning formula for a number of years now. After we took Diggs, Etienne went off the board. The team at the 310 took CJ Stroud. They now have AJ Brown, Nico Collins, Jalen Hurts, and CJ Stroud, which is a bit unorthodox. I think you possibly could have got CJ Stroud at the back of the fifth or maybe even early sixth, but it's fun. Then Terry McLaurin, Zay Flowers, Josh Allen, Isaiah Pacheco, Tank Dell, George Pickens, Josh Jacobs, T. Higgins, Christian Kirk, and Calvin Ridley on the turn before Rashad White, James Cook, Lamar Jackson, and Mark Andrews, taking us up to the 5-6, which is now on the turn. The QBs are starting to go on DraftKings. They do tend to go a little bit earlier than we see on some platforms, and it does tend to cause a bit of a run when that happens. So far, for the elite tight ends, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, and Dalton Kincaid are off the board. But there are going to be options when it gets to us. We could be looking at Trey McBride if he falls to us. I mean, he's already 10 picks past ADP. It would be amazing if he fell to us. Anthony Richardson ADP lines up perfectly with Michael Pittman. We do have an auto drafter ahead of us, which worries me. Like if they do have two quarterbacks already, Trey McBride goes off, which, I mean, if Trey McBride had made it to us 13 picks past ADP, that would have absolutely made my Wednesday night. But outside of Anthony Richardson, who I just mentioned, anybody else standing out to you?
It's Godwin.
Got Keenan Allen.
Godwin for me, and I think Rice is also an interesting potential player because we're starting to see him kind of rise up a little bit because we're not hearing any news about a potential suspension as much as we did when the news kind of first broke. So look, this is a tournament that goes on for a while. So if we get news that Rice is not going to get suspended, well, you're not going to be able to draft him here at ADP 65. So if we're looking at some ROI, I think that Rice makes sense, and we can also click Godwin unless you want to get the stack with Richardson, which I think in the tournament probably makes some sense.
Yeah, I think because of the argument you made on Pittman, I think if it plays out like that, then I want Anthony Richardson.
All
So
right.
let's go. I'll push the button on Anthony Richardson, and you tell me Rashee Rice or Chris Godwin.
I mean, we're going for it all, so let's go Rice.
And definitely closing line value, getting those players who jump up in value, it's worth it. And for us, we already had Garrett Wilson, we have Michael Pittman, we have Stephon Diggs, and we have Rashee Rice. So we don't need Rashee Rice necessarily to contribute straight out the gate. We probably are going to need still to hit one more wide receiver by, say, round 10 to make sure that we have good options on the early part of the season if Rashee Rice is suspended. But yeah, how close was that for you between Chris Godwin and Rashee Rice?
I think it's really based on your roster construction, really. I would say if we didn't have dialed in Wilson, Pittman, Diggs, who I think that all could flirt with 100 catches potentially this season, I would feel more need to get a guy like Chris Godwin, who I think that's what you're kind of betting on from him. That's his projection. He's going to catch a bunch of balls. It's a matter of does he find the end zone or not. So I feel like we didn't necessarily need him in this roster where Rice, hey, this is a massive contest. We know that he plays in a super explosive offense, and the only reason he's going around 6, again, if you were in some of these pre-draft best ball drafts, Rashee Rice was a second-round pick. So his ADP would absolutely skyrocket, and then we can look back and say, oh, well, we got Rice at a good discount, and he was going later than this about a month ago. So he's starting to creep back up. As anyone that's read the ADP risers and fallers article that went on into the site, we talked about, I think, a little bit on Monday's show. So yeah, I think sometimes you have to look at it from a tournament setting and based on, can we get some closing line value? I think we are going to get some here with Rashee Rice, but I do think in a vacuum it is close between the two players. But based on our roster construction, I felt like Rice was the better pick there.
Yeah, and we drafted Chris Godwin on our Fantasy Pros championship team at the FFPC, $350 buy-in for a redraft contest. And at the time, it made sense for our construction. If you want to check out that contest, you can get $25 off by going to fantasypros.com/FFPC/ use the promo code FantasyPros on sign up. $25 off your first entry fee there. Slow drafts, fast drafts, a lot of fun. $1 million to first place. It's the world's largest online season-long tournament, and myself and Andrew will be taking that down as well as taking this down. It's gonna be a good season for us, Andrew.
Can't wait till week 17. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, no longer will I podcast out of my garage. I will buy a new house with a room. So through 6 rounds, we have Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Michael Pittman Jr., Stephon Diggs, Anthony Richardson for that stack, and then Rashee Rice. So far, this feels like a fun roster. You know, we've gone with the Hero RB build with Gibbs just into that second round. We've got the elite quarterback, and we got him as the 6th quarterback off the board. Everything's kind of shaking out pretty nice so far. How are you feeling about it, Andrew?
I like the roster overall, of course, because we're drafting it. So we're going to have to pump it up a little bit. But I think for me, again, going back to what's my standard draft strategy when somebody asks me whether it's best ball redraft, it's usually a hero RB approach. And that's kind of what we followed here. And either it's elite quarterback or elite tight end. In this case, we went with the elite quarterback. And again, the selling point for Richardson was the stack. It's super important to get those types of players in conjunction with each other. And essentially what we're doing here a little bit is, what if Jonathan Taylor doesn't score all the touchdowns? Well, this team is going to benefit from that. So that's the scenario we're playing here, where the Colts are a really good offense, but Jonathan Taylor maybe only scores 8 touchdowns instead of the 20 touchdown season he had a couple years ago, where he was the RB1 overall. So I think that betting on this Colts passing him a little bit more is a little bit contrarian way to play it and against Jonathan Taylor a bit.
Yeah, so we're 2 picks away. We've got Zamir White, Deontay Johnson, Roma Dunze, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, Joe Burrow, Jordan Addison. I'll take the quarterbacks out of it for a moment and just go over to the flex view. Who stands out for you, Andrew, with 19 seconds to go?
Well, I think we can do a cool pairing here where we can get instant production with Deontay Johnson. It's full PPR, and then we can take an upside play on Adunze or Brian Thomas, and I think that both those guys have a lot of upside as rookies.
Let's go Deontay Johnson. I'm definitely down with that one. I think that's great. Let's say I'm kind of quite torn here. This is definitely, I like taking both of them. Do you have a strong lean out of Adunze or Brian Thomas? Because it's really difficult for me to split them.
Do we have any correlation with Thomas? I know we have a bunch of AFC South teams on our roster.
That's Tennessee, so we might have some week 15, 16. Let's go Brian Thomas, and maybe we can build it out that way. But yeah, you've talked plenty over the last few weeks about how you think the AFC South is just going to be shootout central. The Jags, when they get to weeks 15 through 17, play the Jets in week 15, which isn't necessarily ideal. But then they play at Las Vegas and then at home to Tennessee. So feels like we can build something more out there. There's definitely players from the Titans that we can look at when we probably start needing to look into running backs. You know, we've gone 6 wide receivers through 8 rounds, but we're coming up to an area of the draft which is really fruitful for running backs. I put together an article on FantasyPros.com recently talking about how this scenario that between picks 70 to 110, 115, you probably want to take 2 running backs more often than not, because year after year we see players, whether it's James Conner, Leonard Fournette, you go back to last year, there were guys coming out of this range. You go back a couple more years, you got players like Tony Pollard. So it's an area where the running backs have question marks over them, but we also find proven winners. So I'm always happy to be looking for running backs in this range. Do you have particular running backs here that you just find yourself clicking as often as possible?
I do like a lot of these late round running backs. I know I've been pretty high on Chase Brown, even though the Samaje Perine rumblings continue to give me nightmares when I'm sleeping. I think that the handcuffs when it comes to players like Tyler Algier, Elijah Mitchell are really interesting just based on the projected workloads for the running backs in front of them. I think that those guys are pretty interesting. I think that this guy is still on the board. I'm looking. I don't see him. Is Brian Robinson? That's somebody I feel like I always take right around pick 100. And it's weird because I find myself stacking him a lot with Jaden Daniels. And it's not even because I expect him to catch passes from Jaden Daniels, but it's that corollary of mobile rushing quarterback equals more efficient rushing for the running back in a total. Like, I'm praying that we just get Alfred Morris RG3 2.0 this year with Jaden Daniels and Brian Robinson. Like, that's what I'm hoping happens, and hoping it maybe happens for our roster here too if Brian Robinson stays on the board when we pick.
Yeah, I think there's more and more data out there now that shows stacking quarterback with running back is fine. And it used to be we'd think that it was only with pass catching running backs. But if you're betting on good offensive outcomes, then it's fine. Like, look at last year, you had Gus Edwards and Lamar Jackson. And yes, Lamar Jackson at times wasn't incredible for fantasy because Gus would roll in for 2 touchdowns in a game and really cap what Lamar was capable in those. But if you're able to ping pong production, particularly with a running back who you pick up at this range of the draft, then it just feels like, it feels like cheating. You're getting everything you need out of 2 players, and you still have all that kind of upside available to you as well. Since our last pick, it's got a little quarterback hungry in here. We've hit the next pocket of quarterbacks with Joe Burrow going at the 809, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, Tua, Caleb Williams coming back to us. We're a few picks away. I don't know if we would have been looking at the quarterback position, but we've also lost a bunch of running backs: DeAndre Swift, Tajay Spears, Raheem Mostert, Jalen Warren, Jonathan Brooks, Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, and then my second highest rostered running back this year, Brian Robinson, does go off the board. So yeah,
Tragedy.
Jalen Warren, Brian Robinson. I'm glad Austin Eckler's gone, so we don't need to consider him. But Devin Singletary sat there staring at us. I feel like that kind of projected volume feels like a good bet. Are you okay with Devin Singletary?
And if he's able to hold off Tyrone Tracy, he'll be there week 17 for us when we need him against the Colts. So, yeah, Devin Singletary makes sense.
And after that, do you want to go Trevor Lawrence and maybe just be done at quarterback already with Anthony Richardson? We'd add Trevor Lawrence to Brian Thomas to give us that secondary stack.
I think so. There's not, there's not a tight end that's calling my name. We're already following a late round tight end approach at this point anyway. So there's no point in reaching on a guy that's maybe a little above average, but probably average at best. So we're punting tight end. We've committed to it. So let's continue to build out the rest of the roster at strength. So I like Lawrence.
Yeah, and I'm down with Trevor Lawrence for a bounce back season. I think it all starts with the offensive line. Last year, he was 28th, I think, when pressured in completion rate. And the center has been upgraded. They brought in Mitch Morse from Buffalo. The right tackle was a converted left tackle from college, and it didn't go perfectly, but it's a
Go figure.
second season. Yeah. And then you had the left tackle who missed time with injury, whose name escapes me right now. But I think if that offensive line can have a little bit more stability, it's going to do an awful lot for the Jags in general. But yes, so through 10 rounds, we have Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Anthony Richardson for that Colts stack, Rashee Rice, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas, Devin Singletary, and Trevor Lawrence. We're sitting with 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, and 6 wide receivers. And now, because we've got a bit of kind of shored up the running back position, we've got Jahmyr Gibbs there, who we know is going to be at a big part of what the Lions want to do this year, even if David Montgomery swings back to having a slightly bigger role than he did down the stretch. We've got Devin Singletary, who for a decent part of the year, we expect to have a decent volume. He's coming off, 19 touches per game for the Texans from week 11 onwards, I think it was. So now we can start looking at some of rookie running backs and putting them in, just shooting for the moon in terms of what we want from that position, because outside of tight end, everything feels pretty good. Would you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, we don't need to look at receiver at all. It's no longer necessary because if the guys we drafted already are not making our lineups, then we have bigger problems. Like we're not going to be in contention whatsoever. So, and that's part of understanding your roster construction where, looking at the bets you're making early on, you need to draft like you're right in some essence. So what does our roster need now? All of our receivers are carrying our team. We're winning the flex because this rookie receiver's hitting. Rashee Rice doesn't get suspended. And now it's filling the gaps with some of these late round running backs to kind of rotate around that RB2 slot. If Devin Singletary doesn't hold the job down the rest of the year, he's putting up middling production. We need those spike weeks. And then, just kind of piling together some tight end production, whether it's through spike touchdown week. So that'll be fun to take a trip down late round tight end lane. Should be fun.
Yeah, and it definitely can dry up pretty quickly. You want to make sure that you've got tight ends before you start staring down the Chargers option of Hayden Hurst or Will Disley and having to decide which one of those you want in your life. But I think we've definitely still got options. One option to consider later is, do we want to take a shot on one of the Colts tight ends, which isn't necessarily a position that works out. We could take Dalton Schultz if he makes it to us. He's fallen a bit in ADP. Gus Edwards will be there. We're 3 picks away. Mike Williams, TJ Hawkinson, who had started to fall, but I think now with Jordan Addison news, it's kind of halted that fall for TJ Hawkinson. He's just sitting where he is at 130 in ADP. Got AD Mitchell that we could add to the Anthony Richardson stack. I don't know if we need to with a pocket passer, but I wouldn't be against it. We're back on the clock. What are you thinking, Andrew?
So I like for tight end, I like Freiermuth because I think that he's like one of the last tight ends. He could be the number 2 on his team. We've seen this offense feature tight ends before, and he correlates with Rashee Rice in week 17. So if Rice even misses at the beginning of the season, he should be there week 17. So we like that. And then for running backs, just straight up, I think Charbonnet. I think that he's just the best running back on the board.
Yeah, both those picks work for me. I'm a little bit lower on Pat Freiermuth. Just like my main concern is just that Russell Wilson has never been a great quarterback at target in the middle of the field because he's short, and shorter quarterbacks tend not to be great at that. But then you look at what the Steelers have, and they really don't have an awful lot. Arthur Smith, there's plenty of faults with Arthur Smith and how he uses players, but there's definitely times where he can design okay offense. So it feels like the drumbeat out of Pittsburgh is that Pat Freiermuth is going to be an integral part of whatever they do. And if we'd pushed it there, then your tight end options start getting pretty miserable. We would have been looking at Cole Kmet, who I'm not even sure is going to be the tight end 1 on his own team this year because of the pre-existing relationship between Gerald Everett and the coaching staff there now. Luke Musgrave, who we both like, but then we also both like Tucker Kraft. Taysom Hill, who's tight end eligible on DraftKings, K. Dotton. And it's like, those guys, that's fine, but I'd prefer those guys, K. Dotton, Hunter Henry, Isaiah Likely, Jonnu Smith, to be my tight end 2 or my tight end 3. I don't want them to be my tight end 1. And it just very much forces you have to concentrate on the position, particularly where we are at on the turn. If a couple of those guys were there and we were staring down, okay, we don't have a tight end by round 14, we need to double tap the position. And then it just means you can't pick up any falling value of players who are really, let's say a guy like Dontavian Wicks had slipped 15 spots, or Jalen Polk. Those are guys we would have wanted to be able to take. So taking Pat Freiermuth on this team with the build that we have makes sense. But it also gives us an extra bit of week 17 correlation with Rashee Rice, who I would like to think won't be suspended in week 17.
And so I'm hoping, I mean, if he's going to get suspended, please let it be earlier on when most of our guys are healthy, or they should at least be healthy. And during the end of the season when, hey, I'll take the fresh legs, man. It's an underrated narrative, the fresh legs. I don't know why more teams don't do it. Just have a guy not play for the majority of the season, throw him in. It's exactly what happened with Zamir White. That's why he was so good at the end of last year.
It's pretty much what happened with Travis Kelce as well.
Travis Kelce, Aaron Jones. Why do you think he was so good? Because he didn't play the entire season. So, no, but I think you outlined it perfectly. I didn't even really think about that point about if we had done or if we had skipped tight end altogether, then we're kind of stuck where we need to then force ourselves to take tight ends. And we're at a point where we should not feel any urge to force a tight end pick because they're all not great options at this point. Like we have to obviously fill out the roster spot because we need to have a tight end. But unless we're, hey, like I really like this value here with tight end, let's go with it. I don't want to. The last thing I want to do is reach on a tight end that I know is already not going to be good anyway, and you can't like take on any falling values, which I think was another really good point to bring up.
Yep, there's a lot happening in this draft, and there's a lot happening on DraftKings Sportsbook. It's super easy for first timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. It really couldn't be any easier or simpler. Baseball, golf, UFC, there's something for a fan of every sport there, and the football season will be here before you know it. The MVP award is one that always catches my eye. And I can't help but notice the disrespect to Lamar Jackson. The 2-time MVP is currently the joint 5th favorite for the award at plus 1,400, tied with Jordan Love. How many times are we going to doubt this, man? If you're new to DraftKings, bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Andrew, since we last pick, reasonable mixed players, wide receivers, couple of tight ends, TJ Hawkinson, Cole Kmet, Baker Mayfield, and Kirk Cousins went. So not guys we would have wanted. We are 2 picks away. Antonio Gibson, Michael Wilson are guys I'm quite high on. Taysom Hill's there. We could add Aaron Rodgers if we felt like we wanted a third quarterback to go with.
We can take him if he falls to our next picks. If he falls that far.
This is the thing with Aaron Rodgers. Outside of Garrett Wilson, there is nobody that you really want to stack him with. Like, normally the team who's got Mike Williams, they're okay with stacks by this point in the draft. So I don't feel the need to take him. We could look at tight end. Luke Musgrave has fallen a little bit. K. Dotton. Wide receiver, Xavier Legette, Wandale Robinson, Demario Douglas, Ricky Pearsall, Michael Wilson, Rashad Bateman, Jalen Wright, Tyler Algier, Antonio Gibson. What stands out to you with 10 seconds?
I like Algier. I just, again, it's a bet against Bijan Robinson staying healthy the entire season. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but it's a good offense. So I like getting that as a basically late round running back, dart throw. We know he's going to be productive, at least if he gets the opportunity to play. So when it comes to the other positions, I mean, I'm not in love with any tight ends, so I'm good with pushing it off another couple rounds. Yeah.
Let's go wide receiver. I think we could take Legette for some week 17 correlation with Tampa Bay. Did we go Tampa Bay, man? With Carolina, sorry, no. 7 seconds.
Well, we have Deontay, so we could do Legette still too. I like Legette.
And then maybe we can consider whether we want to add Bryce Young, but we don't necessarily need that with Anthony Richardson and Trevor Lawrence. Aaron Rodgers does go the pick after us to a team who is on auto draft.
I was actually thinking about, I think that us drafting Aaron Rodgers and seeing him help us would actually be not beneficial, because I think that him going to a team like he just did, that probably helps us actually more, because that makes that team so much worse in the long run that I think that's almost more beneficial to us actually not to take Aaron Rodgers and let someone else take Aaron Rodgers on a team where it's unstacked. And again, like you said, they're on auto draft.
Yeah, it just, for me, kind of comes back to, if I'm drafting a pocket passer, then I need to believe that they can hit 300 yards in a game consistently, or I need to have 2 of the pieces in their offense. And I don't think that's anything that you can really say with confidence about the Jets. The Jets have a top-tier defense. We know the defense regresses sometimes, and betting on it year to year isn't the greatest process, but the talent there is pretty undeniable. We know that they've got a top-tier running back, so they're still going to want to run the ball plenty. Yes, they've got Garrett Wilson, but outside of Garrett Wilson, there's not much. Okay, potentially they get Devontae Adams, and then fine, I'll start drafting Aaron Rodgers double stacks. But I can't see a world where Aaron Rodgers is going out there at the age he is, coming off an Achilles injury, and suddenly being hyper pass heavy, and to the point where the pace is so good that it just kills me because I didn't take enough of him. So yeah, I'm completely fine going. We have Trevor Lawrence, who, yeah, there's question marks about him, but we've paired him with Brian Thomas, a player who came into the NFL off an incredible season with LSU. And we've got Anthony Richardson, who, I mean, Anthony Richardson, if he's anything like last year but can stay on the field, could just break fantasy. So missing out on Aaron Rodgers when we've got what we've got is 100% fine with me.
Yeah, the thing is, Aaron Rodgers, the way he beats us is if at week 17, that's when he finally decides to throw for 300 yards. And he beats us because we don't have him. We're the one Garrett Wilson team that makes it that doesn't have him attached to Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, so if the Jets go into Buffalo on week 17 and put up an absolute barnstormer, then it would definitely be slightly surprising. But maybe it's the one year where Buffalo is actually totally tropical and Aaron Rodgers feels completely fine. You know, I mean, the Jets, we expect them to be around the playoffs, so there's a good chance that they'll be fighting for their lives. We are now at a point where there's 3 auto draft teams in this room, which kind of makes you have to be a little bit careful about what you push in. You know, the ADP fallers aren't going to come to you as much because they'll just get auto-clicked by certain teams. Geno Smith is currently almost 22 picks past ADP, and then straight away, as I say, that goes off the board. But he wouldn't have fit with what we're doing. At the top of ADP is Wandale Robinson, Isaiah Likely, Derek Hart, Michael Wilson, Rashad Bateman, Roman Wilson, who apparently still is a Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver, Troy Franklin, Demarcus Robinson. Anything in particular?
I think likely makes a lot of sense. We have Stephon Diggs, so we have that week 17 correlation. And if it's not Andrews, well, why can't it be likely that week? So we know likely has elite upside if something were to happen to Andrews and we need a tight end. So I think he makes a lot of sense from our build there at tight end.
Yeah, and then I think we probably want to hit a running back before things get particularly miserable. Like if we miss this tier, Khalil Herbert, Braylon Allen, Damian Pierce, Roshan Johnson, you start getting really tricky. And we've currently only got 4. Are you in on?
Roshan for me.
Excellent. Let's do that and get that tied up. We spoke on Monday on our ADP fallers and rises video where how we kind of feel that if Khalil Herbert left town, neither of us would be wanting to move DeAndre Swift up in our rankings. But Roshan Johnson is a player that instead of getting him in the 16th round, which was a slight reach ahead of ADP, I think you'd be talking about, 12th round? Who would you take him ahead of if Khalil Herbert wasn't there?
I mean, I think Roshan would probably be going closer to where we got like Charbonnet, right? If you're looking at a 2-man backfield. And it's funny because those guys, when I saw Roshan on the draft board, I was immediately thinking, jumping again to week 17, well, it's Bears Seahawks in Chicago. Are they going to give the ball to DeAndre Swift in the freezing tundra of Chicago? No, they're going to give it to their big bulldozer running back Roshan. And on the other side, it's going to be Charbonnet running over Bears defenders. That's what's going to happen. So I like our running back. Oh, this is what we got. Big Charbonnet, Algier, Roshan. Big running backs that can catch passes. That's what I like.
Yeah, so we got Jahmyr Gibbs, pass catcher, Devin Singletary, who caught some balls in Texas last year, Charbonnet, Algier, and Roshan Johnson. There's a lot of upside. We didn't get the rookies that we talked about before, but I think that's fine because we're making a lot of second-year player bets, and I know that's something you've been hot on this year.
Yeah, no, everything that I've done in terms of dynasty research, looking at who are the best running back targets. And it's funny because I looked at my running back targets to target in dynasty from that I wrote last year, and it was horrible. So I was trying to figure out where did I go wrong, and it was buying these veteran running backs left and right, and that was horrible process. And what I found was the best bet is to buy these second-year running backs that didn't really fire in year one. You know, it's rookie running backs and second-year running backs that see the biggest leaps in dynasty value year over year. And if they're having a big leap in dynasty value, well, that means they had a good redraft season too, or at least a better redraft season from their rookie year. So I think that pushing our chips in on some of these guys like a Charbonnet, like a Roshan, big running backs that you could see get high value touches. That's the biggest thing. We're not sure how these new coaches, how are these new offensive coaches going to shake up these backfields? We don't necessarily know. But so I like taking these swings on these types of players.
Yeah, so since our last pick, we've had a few Titans go off the board. Jonnu Smith, Jelani Woods, Jatavion Sanders. Things are drying up quickly there. Russell Wilson, Derek Carr, and Drake May also off the board. Bryce Young did go in the 14th round of this, just after we took Xavier Legette. He went a few picks later. So in terms of quarterbacks who'd stack with what we've got, it's not an awful lot. Basically, the only starters left are JJ McCarthy, Daniel Jones, and Bo Nix. We could backdoor something with Daniel Jones, maybe Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt.
We could do a Daniel Jones with the Giants tight end. That would be the other option we could do. I know Theo Johnson's already hurt, so Bellinger, Sisson, I don't know. Lawrence Cager, yeah. I know that Dayball's talked up him, but yeah, if we were drafting another quarterback, Daniel Jones, and he also plays Anthony Richardson week 17. That game shoots out.
Yeah, and I think Daniel Jones just went off the board as we discussed that, of course. So, I mean, the Giants players can be in play. We can probably push Bellinger a little further. I would imagine, his ADP is down at 229, so we can possibly push him. Maybe want another running back. In terms of quarterbacks, it's just Bo Nix. I think you'd be looking at maybe Bo Nix and Audric Estime if you wanted to get a stack there, or do you want to go something different? Wide receiver Tyler Boyd, Jalen Hyatt, Devontae Walker, Rondale Moore, Trey Palmer, Malik Washington, Greg Dortch with 10 seconds to go.
I like for running backs. I like Edwards-Helaire. He's Chiefs. If Pacheco goes down, then I feel like he's going to be the guy. So
Yeah, that works, and it gives us more Week 17 correlation with the Steelers. So we've got 25 seconds to make our next pick. In terms of where we're at 2-6-7-2. We probably want one more wide
do
receiver.
we
We've got a
want
couple.
Juwan Johnson if we're gonna, or are we just doing Bellinger?
Let's do Juwan Johnson,
Okay.
and let's see what comes back to us, because I've got far more faith in Juwan Johnson having more fantasy viable weeks than I do Daniel Bellinger, despite the fact that, like you say, Theo Johnson is injured. So through 18 rounds, we now have 3 tight ends. We've got Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Anthony Richardson, Rashee Rice, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas Jr., Devin Singletary, Trevor Lawrence, Pat Fryermuth, Zach Charbonnet, Tyler Algier, Xavier Leggett, Isaiah Likely, Roshan Johnson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Juwan Johnson. How you feeling, Andrew?
Yeah, tight end room is not great, but this is what happens when you do a late round tight end approach. It's not going to feel sexy. It's not going to feel good. But I talked about it when we started the show, where if you're going for elite upside, you're going to have to sacrifice it somewhere, and someone's going to have to surprise you. Juwan Johnson, oh, his foot is magically healed. Excellent. Mark Andrews, oh, he doesn't play the whole season, likely. Now we have a tight end one. So again, it feels bad looking at our current tight end room, but I look at our receivers and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, knowing that we have those receivers and our quarterbacks look like they could both be top 10 finishers, which also makes me feel very good.
Yeah, and that's the key with a wide receiver heavy approach, is that you're looking to not just dominate your wide receiver position, you're looking to dominate the wide receiver position and the flex. And out of our first 8 picks, we went wide receiver at 6 of them. With Garrett Wilson, Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Rashee Rice, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas. If Rashee Rice doesn't get suspended or only gets a minimal suspension, those guys are absolutely going to just rack up points. Maybe Stephon Diggs goes off the rails by week 17. But Garrett Wilson, we know that he's going to crush. We know that, you know, Deontay Johnson is going to earn targets. Like, I have no concerns about the wide receiver room whatsoever. The running back room, Gibbs should be in our lineup every single week. And then you're looking for one of Singletary, Charbonnet, Algier, Roshan Johnson, or CEH to fill in that second running back role. Because if one of these running backs hit the flex, it either means that our wide receiver room was toast, or it means that one of them had, well, 2 of them, 3 of them had incredible weeks. So you can take that. The tight end room definitely is a little bit sketchy, but
Do we consider a fourth tight end based on our build? What do you think?
no, I've spent enough time diving into what works on DraftKings to see that 4 tight end builds rarely provide good results. Yeah, I think when you're looking at that, it just becomes very difficult to have 4 players where only one of them most likely is going to hit your lineup every year. 3 tight end builds have absolutely dominated compared to 2 tight end builds on DraftKings. But yeah, I think we've made our bed and we just have to line it. Unless you think Colby Parkinson, Zach Ertz, Michael Mayer, Theo Johnson, or Cade Stover is the answer.
I mean, no, I mean, my reaction gives it all. But I guess the only reason I bring it up was, and I wasn't sure if there was anyone else. Again, we're probably looking at running backs for our last 2 picks then, or another
I think we can
receiver.
go running back and one wide receiver. Yeah. So, I mean, we could add Jalen Hyatt for a little bit of correlation, or Greg Dortch, Josh Reynolds,
I mean,
Kendrick
also Tucker
Bourne.
Kraft is hanging out there too. So like that's why it's like if I'm looking at the board and just like overall players, if I just like Tucker Kraft, then I don't feel like the worst in the world, especially because he's now going undrafted in a bunch of drafts because he's hurt. So I would only bring that up. I like Malik Washington though out of receivers, just to name a player, but I do like Tucker Kraft a lot too.
Well, we're going to take Tucker Kraft, and I'm going to let you push me into it because I never do a 4 tight end build. So I like the idea of doing something different. That's absolutely one of the joys of drafting with different people, is taking these different tactics. I'm just going to scroll down just in case anybody else stands out whilst we run down the clock with 12 seconds. Brandon Rice, Jalen Tolbert, MVS, John Mechie, running back, Mason, Eric Gray, Dylan Laub, Abanikanda. Tucker Kraft is the pick. So through 20 rounds, we picked out of the 12 slot. 2684 is our roster construction with a Hero RB build. Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, that Hero RB. Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Anthony Richardson stacked with Michael Pittman, Rashi Rice, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas Jr., Devin Singletary, Trevor Lawrence to go with Brian Thomas Jr., Pat Frymouth, Zach Charbonnet, Tyler Algier, Xavier Leggett, Isaiah Likely, Roshan Johnson, CEH, Juwan Johnson, Malik Washington, and then Andrew's boy, Tucker Kraft, to round out the draft. I like this. I think it's a fun team. I think I wouldn't have wanted to have less than 6 running backs on this team when you've gone hero RB and then moved away from the position till round 9. But I think there's plenty of upside. There's plenty of contingent value. There's having the rookies in Malik Washington, Xavier Leggett at wide receiver, and Brian Thomas is fun. How are you feeling about this team, Andrew?
I like it. And I think, and the reason I brought up the tight end or the 4 tight end build, and not to say that it's had a better advance rate, because clearly, like you said, that's not the case. But and this is something that I kind of looked at and was thinking about when I was doing some of these DraftKings September only drafts, where you're basically only drafting from weeks 1 through 4. And I kind of found myself in situations where I was so unimpressed by the running backs and receivers available to me, at least early on in the year, where I felt like I would get better production from the tight ends instead, going in that range, just straight up versus the receivers and running backs that, at least early on in weeks 1 through 4, I couldn't see a path where, okay, if the team is mostly healthy, then this guy is doing absolutely nothing this week. And I'd rather go with another tight end who I think could fall in the end zone, maybe have an opportunity of scoring if this offense is cooking. Like the Robert Tonyans, the Colby Parkinsons. Like I was taking those guys more often than the fringier receivers, just because, hey, it looks like this guy may have some early season opportunities. And it's obviously different here in this draft because it's on the back end of the season. But Tucker Kraft, well, if he's like starting day one, or if he's the starting tight end for the Packers at some point during the season, well, then he would be going not in the 20th round or going undrafted altogether. So in our unique build where tight end was so weak, I really feel like adding a guy like Kraft, who, look, if he had not been hurt, again, we drafted the 2 guys that are injured, right? Between Juwan Johnson and Tucker Kraft. So, but if either of those guys ends up being healthy, well, then we got them at an absolute steal. And again, at the end of the day, getting ADP value in any way, shape, or form usually is going to help you turn out in the green. So that's one thing I wanted to mention just about the tight ends and how it was those September drafts that kind of got me thinking about, well, if I really just feel better about the tight ends in general than the running backs or receivers, then, I want to be at least open to maybe taking another tight end when I usually wouldn't.
No, I like it. I think, like I say, early in the draft, you get into these kind of just, you take players out of routine or you take builds. So for me, finishing with a 2.684, I probably would have finished 2.693 with 2 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 9 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends instead. But adding that extra tight end in, the more we talk about it, the more I kind of come round on it. I think Pat Frymouth, I outlined why I'm less high on him than yourself. Isaiah Likely, there's a real chance that he just has weeks where he just isn't involved in the game plan. Juwan Johnson, we know that he's injured currently, and as Adam Schefter reported, he could miss some time. Tucker Kraft obviously is also injured, but we'll find out in the next few days whether he's going to start camp on the PUP list or not. But even so, it sounded like he could be back out there to start the season. And Tucker Kraft down the stretch last year was incredibly impressive. He was more fantasy productive than Luke Musgrave was through the rest of the season. So there's definitely an argument that when we're trying to piece together this tight end room, that it makes sense to maybe use one of our picks there, and rather than going, okay, I'll just auto use default to a wide receiver, which is where I would have gone. I would have gone 2.693 and seen if I could have found a wide receiver with some week 17 correlation or an extra stacking partner to one of these guys, like somebody like Jalen Hyatt or something who plays the Colts in week 17. But instead going, we don't need that 9th wide receiver. We had, Garrett Wilson, Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Rashi Rice, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas, and then added in some upside swings on Leggett and Malik Washington. So, yeah, I think it's a fun way to approach it. It's good to get into these drafts and try different things before it gets too late. Otherwise, you can be looking back in September and going, I really wish I'd done this or that. Is there anything else in this draft that you feel like you really wish it had swung our way?
So two things for some of the last picks. So I kind of feel like we should have gone all in on the bet against Jonathan Taylor and taken Trey Sermon, and maybe instead of Malik
Yes.
Washington. I was thinking about that after we took Washington. I was thinking, if we got to go all in. Jonathan Taylor is going to be a bust, and it's going to be the Colts offense. Trey Sermon's going to dominate. So that was something I was thinking about. And then it was interesting because we're on this tight end topic. We took 4 tight ends. There was a team that took 1 tight end in this particular draft. And of all the tight ends to pick 1 tight end, they took George Kittle, the ultimate boomer bust tight end, which I think is kind of fascinating because that lineup is almost guaranteed to get zeros because George Kittle. Oh, go ahead.
They added Donald Parham in the 20th round.
Oh, they did do Donald. Okay, I guess I got ahead of myself. They got Donald Parham.
I don't know how much you're expecting from Donald Parham. I mean, the XFL former legend, but yeah, it's a very thin bet. When you look back and you go, okay, instead of adding Donta Foreman here, they could have added Zach Ertz, Tucker Kraft, or instead of going here and adding Zay Jones, they could have added Jatavian Sanders, Mike Gesicki, or Juwan Johnson. I think I would have leaned that way. There was one team out of the 1,364 teams that made the DraftKings final last year that got there with 1 tight end, and it was a Travis Kelce team. They did not win it all. I think they did pretty miserably in the end. They got a lot of player selections right around that, but yeah, I don't think 1 tight end builds or 1 QB builds, they feel fun because you look at your wide receiver or your running back room. It's like, I have no weakness outside of this one position where I only took 1 player.
Don't look at that though. Don't look away.
No, look over here where everything's fun. So yeah, it's there's a lot of different ways that you can get weird and different on DraftKings, but on the whole, this feels like a fun lineup. Will it win 1.5 million? We will just have to wait and see. If you've enjoyed this, go over to fantasypros.com/review/ leave a positive review. Tell our bosses how much more best ball content you want. Loads of best ball content on the site written. We want to bring you more video content. Leave a comment on YouTube. If you've got questions about best ball, drop them down there. Myself and Andrew are going to answer every single one of your questions. We're going to keep bringing you all this kind of great best ball content, all the ADP content, all the way through until things lock. From myself, from Andrew, we will catch you next time, and until then, see you in the best ball lobbies.